All right, so President-elect Trump just named two individuals to his foreign policy team. We have Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State and Representative Michael Waltz as National Security Advisor. And everybody has their own opinion here. So today we're going to dive into where these two stand on some of the most pressing issues facing U.S. foreign policy today. That's the ongoing war in Ukraine, the ongoing conflict involving Israel and Iran, and the growing military challenge from China. We're also going to take a look at their views on NATO and how they think the U.S. should handle their commitments there. Now, this isn't going to be about guessing what they might do. Instead, we're going to let their own words from quotes, interviews, and official statements do the talking. With their past statements as kind of a guide, we're going to try to uncover what Rubio and Waltz could bring to the table on the world stage. So let's dive in. Now, for anybody new here, I focus on discussing war, conflict, and national security issues around the world, not U.S. domestic politics. I know that I'm going to be kind of walking a fine line today, but I'm going to try. Wish me luck. Let's start with Rubio on Ukraine. He's been pretty loud and clear here, making it known that he sees the conflict as a matter of both moral and strategic importance for the United States. In a 2022 press release, Rubio emphasized the significance of Ukraine's struggle, saying, quote, "We cannot return to a world where countries simply choose to invade their neighbors. It's dangerous and destructive," end quote. Now, he doesn't see unchecked aggression like Russia's as something that affects only Europe. For him, it's a threat to global stability and an invitation to other authoritarian regimes to try their luck elsewhere. Rubio believes that if Russia gets away with this, we could be seeing more invasions down the road. But it's not just about protecting borders and standing up to Russia. Rubio's approach is as much about sending a message to the world. In a 2023 interview, he said, quote, "This is a fight between freedom and tyranny, and America's support for Ukraine sends a message to every authoritarian regime around the world," end quote. This isn't just about Russia for Rubio. He wants countries like China and North Korea to see that the U.S. won't stand by if they try similar moves. Now, Rubio isn't saying the U.S. should give Ukraine a blank check either. Accountability seems to be pretty crucial to him, and he's spoken up about this multiple times, making sure that U.S. support is used effectively. In a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, Rubio grilled officials on how aid is being allocated, emphasizing that every dollar counts. He's clear, supporting Ukraine is essential, but it has to be done wisely. Now, Rubio is also focused on defining what victory should look like in Ukraine. In a 2024 interview, he emphasized the importance of having a clear endgame, saying, quote, "We hope that when the time comes, there is more leverage on the Ukrainian side than the Russian side. That really is the goal here in my mind," end quote. To him, this isn't about endless support. It's about having a strategic and measurable goal. And when it comes to NATO, Rubio's always been a pretty staunch supporter. He's spoken repeatedly about the alliance's importance, especially in countering threats like Russia. I mean, in February 2024, Rubio confidently stated, quote, "I have zero concern that the United States is going to pull out of NATO," end quote. I mean, he views NATO as a critical piece in the broader strategy against Russian aggression and believes that any talk of weakening the alliance is misguided. For Rubio, NATO isn't just about Europe. It's about maintaining a united front in the face of global threats. Now, moving on to Israel and Iran, Rubio's stance is clear. Full support for Israel and zero tolerance for Iran's regional ambitions. For Rubio, Israel is more than just an ally. It's a crucial democratic partner in the Middle East. In a 2021 statement, he called Israel, quote, "a beacon of democracy in a very tough neighborhood," end quote. Adding, quote, "The United States must continue to support Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas and other Iran-backed terror groups," end quote. And Rubio has regularly highlighted the direct threat that Israel faces from some of these Iranian-backed militias like Hamas and Hezbollah. In a 2023 statement, he said, quote, "Iran continues to destabilize the Middle East through its proxies. Hamas and Hezbollah don't operate in a vacuum. They're funded, trained, and armed by Tehran," end quote. For Rubio, every attack on Israel is an extension of Iran's broader agenda in the region, making countering Tehran's influence essential to Israel's security. Now, Rubio's stance on Iran's nuclear ambitions is equally tough. In a 2022 press release, he warned, quote, "A nuclear-armed Iran is a risk for the entire world. We cannot let them reach that point," end quote. Rubio believes that maximum pressure through sanctions and diplomatic isolation is the only way to prevent Iran from going nuclear. He's vocal about his skepticism towards diplomacy with Iran, saying, quote, "We've tried negotiating with Iran for years, and what has it brought us? Iran has taken our concessions and continued to fund terrorism," end quote. And as for the recent conflict in Gaza, Rubio has emphasized that Israel has the right to defend itself against attacks from Hamas, viewing these actions as justified and blaming Hamas for causing the deaths of Palestinian civilians, having knowingly put them in harm's way when they carried out the October 7th attack. Now let's switch gears to Rubio's stance on China and Taiwan. Rubio sees the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP's, ambitions as a direct challenge to U.S. security in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. He's warned repeatedly that China's military growth isn't just defensive, but about asserting power and influence on a global scale. In May 2022, Rubio introduced the Taiwan Peace Through Strength Act, aimed at bolstering Taiwan's defenses and speeding up U.S. arms sales to the island. He explained his reasoning by saying, quote, "Tensions continue to rise as the CCP actively carries out aggressive military actions near Taiwan," end quote. For Rubio, a strong Taiwan is essential to keeping China's ambitions in check. But Rubio isn't only talking about arming Taiwan. He's also focused on ensuring U.S. readiness in the region. In 2023, he introduced the Deterring Chinese Preemptive Strikes Act that aimed to strengthen U.S. military infrastructure to deter any preemptive strike by China. Rubio has also been rather consistent in saying that the U.S. must be prepared to respond swiftly if China makes aggressive moves towards Taiwan. Rubio also introduced the Taiwan Relations Reinforcement Act in October 2023, a bipartisan effort aimed to update U.S. policy with even stronger support for Taiwan as China ramps up military and diplomatic pressure, saying, quote, "Reinforcing our nation's support for Taiwan is critical as the island faces the increased threat of a CCP military attack," end quote. For Rubio, Taiwan isn't just a small island, it's a crucial part of the broader strategy to counter China's influence. So that's Rubio's approach, standing firm with Taiwan so long as there's accountability, backing Israel and countering Iran, and taking a proactive stance on China's ambitions around Taiwan. Now let's get into Representative Michael Waltz, the former Green Beret and global war on terror veteran who's got his own distinct takes on these issues. Now, while Waltz has been a strong advocate for U.S. support to Ukraine, he's also clear that this support shouldn't be open-ended or solely funded by American taxpayers. In a September 2023 op-ed titled "The Era of Ukraine's Blank Check from Congress is Over," Waltz argued that U.S. support for Ukraine needs to be reevaluated with a greater emphasis on European burden sharing and a clear strategy from the Biden administration. For Waltz, this isn't just about helping Ukraine, it's about making sure America's support is balanced, strategic, and above all, conditional. Waltz acknowledges the importance of supporting Ukraine to prevent Putin from advancing further, and he writes, quote, "Most Americans are sympathetic to Ukraine and understand Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion is the next big step in his goal of recreating the old Soviet Union. If Putin is successful in Ukraine, he won't stop until he involves other NATO countries," end quote. Waltz is clear that if Russia succeeds in Ukraine, NATO countries could be next, which would force the U.S. to uphold treaty obligations and possibly send American forces to Europe, a scenario that Waltz believes must be avoided. However, Waltz argues that while supporting Ukraine is important, Europe should be taking a greater share of the financial and military burden. Waltz believes that if America is going to continue supporting Ukraine, European nations, especially economic powerhouses like Germany, need to increase their defense contributions to meet the 2% GDP NATO defense spending target. Waltz criticized the Biden administration for failing to rally European allies to meet their commitments, writing that Biden's approach to diplomacy is lagging and that many European nations have fallen short on their defense spending pledges. According to Waltz, quote, "The administration cannot expect American taxpayers to pay for European security indefinitely," end quote. He also took aim at Biden's lack of clarity on America's end goals in Ukraine. Waltz noted that Biden's vague, quote, "as long as it takes" slogan isn't a substitute for a clear strategy, and criticized the administration for not setting benchmarks for success, asking, quote, "Will American military spending continue until Ukraine has pushed Russia back to its pre-war boundaries, its pre-2014 boundaries, or until the Putin regime collapses? We don't know because Biden refuses to tell us," end quote. For Waltz, it's crucial that Congress lays out conditions for further support to Ukraine rather than offering indefinite aid without a clear endgame. In short, Waltz's view is that while it's vital to support Ukraine and prevent further Russian aggression, America's commitment should be conditional, with Europe stepping up to share the burden and with clear objectives. Now let's turn to Waltz's stance on NATO, and here's where he echoes some of Trump's push for stronger burden sharing amongst the alliance. In a February 2024 op-ed titled "Trump is Right About NATO Burden Sharing," Waltz emphasized that NATO allies need to contribute their fair share. He highlighted how, for decades, European countries have relied on American taxpayers to shoulder the defense burden, allowing them to focus their budgets in other areas. Waltz's take? That imbalance isn't just unsustainable, it's also dangerous. He referenced a 2021 warning from former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who had criticized European leaders for their lack of defense spending, a concern later amplified by Trump. Now, while Waltz fully supports NATO, he argues that the alliance must be based on fair contributions. Waltz noted that in 2023, the U.S. spent $743 billion on defense, compared to Europe and Canada's combined $356 billion, even though their collective economies matched the size of the U.S. economy. According to Waltz, quote, "Our country can no longer afford this disproportionality," end quote, urging allies like Germany, Italy, and others to meet the 2% GDP spending target. So while Waltz backs NATO as a critical alliance, he wants stronger commitment from allies, urging them to treat their own defense needs as a priority rather than assuming America will always foot the bill. Now, moving to Israel and Iran, Waltz's stance is firm. In a 2021 interview, he described Israel as, quote, "our closest ally in the Middle East, a democracy surrounded by hostile forces. Standing by them isn't just an option, it's an obligation," end quote. And like Rubio, Waltz sees Israel's security as essential to the overall region. Now, regarding Iran, Waltz is particularly vocal about its role in funding and arming terror groups. In 2022, he said, quote, "Iran continues to be the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, funding proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas to destabilize the Middle East." Waltz believes that Iran's influence is a direct threat not only to Israel, but to the entire region. When it comes to the ongoing conflict in Gaza, Waltz has expressed strong support for Israel's right to defend itself. In an October 2023 statement, he remarked, quote, "Israel has every right to defend itself against terrorist groups who hide behind civilians. The international community needs to recognize Israel's right to protect its people," end quote. And Waltz has also warned about the dangers of a nuclear-armed Iran. In a 2023 op-ed, he argued, quote, "A nuclear-armed Iran would not only threaten Israel, but would spark a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, endangering U.S. national security," end quote. Finally, let's tackle Waltz's stance on China. Waltz tends to view China as the top threat to U.S. security and has been outspoken about their growing military ambitions. In 2023, he warned, quote, "China's military buildup isn't about protecting its borders, it's about projecting power worldwide," end quote. Waltz views this as a direct challenge to U.S. global influence. Taiwan is central to Waltz's strategy on China. In 2023, he stated, quote, "If we allow China to take Taiwan, it's not just bad for Taiwan, it's bad for the entire Indo-Pacific," end quote. Waltz supports strong military assistance for Taiwan and believes that the U.S. must make it clear that Chinese aggression will have serious consequences. So there you have it, Rubio and Waltz, two pretty powerful voices with different approaches. Rubio leans into ideology, kind of focusing on democracy and values, while Waltz seems to zero in more on practical, immediate threats. Both are generally strong NATO supporters and back Israel's actions in Gaza, as well as the broader Middle East. And when it comes to China, they're pretty united in the need for robust deterrence, especially regarding Taiwan. Now, look, hopefully that was helpful to get an idea of the direction these two might take as they assume, pretty critical positions within the U.S. national security apparatus. Of course, there are a few other key players yet to be named, so it'll be interesting, to see if those others align with Rubio and Waltz on some of these issues, or if they serve as more of a counter to a couple of their viewpoints. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.